Caught in the crossfire. How America's political battlefield is impacting Hindu Americans. Written by Rakesh Krishnan Simha. As the ideological war between the left and right intensifies, Hindu Americans find themselves increasingly alienated. Torn between progressive critiques of their religion and conservative attacks on immigration, they face a tough choice. Stay out of the fray or take a stand in a deeply polarized America. America is at war with itself. The country is fractured, and the cultural and ideological battle between the left and right seems destined to get worse. The radical left is pushing for progressive change, social justice, and a reshaping of American identity. On the right, MAGA, the populist conservative wave, is digging in its heels, fighting for nationalism, stricter immigration laws, and a return to a vision of America that seems increasingly out of touch with today's reality. The political divide has never been starker, and the tension is only growing. The stakes for the Hindu American community are high. At a time when the U.S. intelligence agencies and the Democratic Party are more aligned with the left, while the police and Republican forces are solidly backing the right, the nation feels like it's on the edge of a civil war. After President Donald Trump's spectacular comeback, his take-no-prisoners style of governance is proving to be extremely popular with the MAGA crowd, while the left is preparing to hit back. This split, both political and cultural, leaves Americans, especially Hindu Americans, questioning their place in the country and wondering who will protect their future. Torn between two extremes. Historically, Hindu Americans have leaned left, drawn to the Democratic Party's more inclusive stance on immigration, civil rights, and social welfare. However, in 2024, a surprising shift occurred. Many Indian Americans swung dramatically toward Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Trump, a self-proclaimed admirer of India, initially seemed to offer a strong bond between his administration and the Indian diaspora. His words about being a big fan of Hindus and his promise to protect Hindu Americans against the anti-religion agenda of the radical left struck a chord. But behind the scenes, something darker was brewing. As Trump's base became more aggressive in its nativist, anti-immigrant rhetoric, Hindu Americans began to feel increasingly alienated. Trump's supposed affinity for India clashed with the rising tide of MAGA's deep-rooted resentment against Indian tech workers, especially those on H-1B visas. The community, once hopeful about Trump's pro-India stance, now found itself caught in the crossfire of a toxic political culture. H-1B debate. Flashpoint for hatred. One of the most explosive issues at the heart of this conflict is the H-1B visa program, which allows foreign workers, particularly from India, to fill skilled jobs in the U.S. tech industry. Indian workers make up the bulk of these visa holders, and conservative pundits have long framed the program as a threat to American workers. From the likes of Coulter, who has accused Indian immigrants of taking American jobs, to politicians pushing for a crackdown on the H-1B program, the anti-immigrant sentiment is palpable. Hindu Americans, many of whom have built successful careers in tech, feel the heat. While the MAGA movement rallies against illegal immigration, Indian immigrants are increasingly being painted with the same brush despite their legal status. The resentment toward H-1B workers has created a deep sense of unease in a community that was once proud of its contributions to the American workforce. Birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution promises citizenship to those born on U.S. soil, a measure ratified in 1868 to ensure citizenship for formerly enslaved people after the Civil War. But Trump's 2025 presidency brought something unsettling. To curb unlawful immigration, the U.S. president issued an executive order denying citizenship to those born after February 19, 2025, whose parents are in the country illegally. It also forbids U.S. agencies from issuing or accepting any state document recognizing citizenship for such children. Under the new policy, children born to parents on temporary visas, like H-1B, H-4, or student visas, would no longer automatically receive American citizenship. This is yet another massive blow to the Indian American community. In 2023, 72% of H-1B visas, which have recently come under criticism, were granted to Indian citizens, according to U.S. Citizenship and Homeland Services. Many Indian families who've spent decades navigating the U.S. immigration system have now seen their children's futures thrown into uncertainty. No longer will Indian children automatically qualify for in-state tuition, federal financial aid, or other benefits tied to citizenship. As these families grapple with the implications of this policy, the American dream, once so attainable, feels increasingly out of reach. Who do you trust? Hindu Americans are thus caught between two extremes. On the left, progressive activists who see Hinduism as a regressive and oppressive religion. And on the right, MAGA/Christian groups who view the very presence of Hindus as a threat to American values. It's a political no man's land, where the community is forced to choose between two forces that seem more interested in fighting each other than in understanding the aspirations of immigrant communities. Anand Mittal, a Washington, D.C. public affairs professional, explains why Hindu Americans are under fire. While most Americans view the Indian diaspora positively, political activists on the left and right do not. They see a community focused on academics, career, and family, ignorant of American political fault lines. We keep our heads down and rarely participate in American political debates. Worst of all, we refuse to become foot soldiers in the new crusades that seek to transform America through woke activism or to make America great again. Mittal's point is crucial. Hindu Americans have traditionally avoided America's cultural wars, preferring to focus on their families, careers, and religious practices. But in today's polarized environment, staying neutral is no longer an option. The battle lines are drawn, and Hindu Americans find themselves in the middle of a war they never signed up for. Left-right jabs. One of the most prominent examples of hostility faced by Hindus comes from American college campuses, which have long been battlegrounds for ideological struggles. Events like Holi against Hindutva serve as a striking illustration of how Hindu students are coerced into engaging with political movements they may not support. These events, often organized under the guise of social justice or anti-colonialism, pressure Hindu students to conform to left-wing political ideologies, painting Hinduism as inherently tied to the far-right Hindutva movement in India. The event creates a false equivalence, as it forces Hindu students to engage with political discourse that conflates their religious practices with a far-right ideology that many Hindus reject. The hostility is also voiced by academics, some of whom seek to push a political agenda based on racial and cultural assumptions. For example, Penn law professor Amy Wax ranted on Tucker Carlson's Fox News program that there should be less immigration from shithole India because Indian immigrants are envious of America's prosperity and institutions. Her attack on Brahmin women being taught that they are superior to Americans is not only unsubstantiated and sexist, but it also contributes to the growing climate of anti-Hindu sentiment, perpetuating harmful stereotypes about the community. This claim of Brahmin women being socialized into a mindset of superiority is both inaccurate and reductive. Plus, the increasingly fashionable use of the term Brahmin as a shorthand for systemic religious elitism in Hinduism deepens misunderstandings. This trend contributes to a distorted portrayal of Hinduism as an inherently hierarchical and oppressive religion, ignoring the vast diversity of beliefs, practices, and communities within it. It overlooks the significant efforts within Hindu society itself to challenge caste-based discrimination and to promote social justice and equality. This particular attack on Indians and Hindus stands out because it is a joint hit job by a leftist academic, incidentally a child of immigrant parents from Eastern Europe, and an American right-wing journalist who believes British rule was good for India and has spoken in favor of Christian-centric nationalism. Again, an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal titled "Canceling Student Debt Would Be a Brahmin Bailout" illustrates this tendency. In the article, penned by a Muslim writer, the term Brahmin is used pejoratively to describe a privileged elite class that allegedly benefits disproportionately from government subsidies. This kind of characterization is not only factually inaccurate, but also reveals a deep-seated desire to scapegoat Hindu immigrants, thereby reducing an entire group to a monolithic, politically inconvenient entity. Unfortunately, the Indian/Hindu diaspora is too divided to oppose this negative stereotyping jointly. Plus, within the diaspora, some individuals perpetuate this divisiveness. In a recent op-ed in The Atlantic, Vidya Krishnan, an Indian writer, described how caste discrimination had penetrated American workplaces, colleges, and communities. Worse yet, this writer called Hindus and the broader Hindu diaspora termites, equating them to an infestation. The sheer venom of such remarks reveals the troubling trend of self-hatred within certain segments of the Indian American community, where individuals turn against each other based on political ideology. Navigating a divided America. The question remains, where do Hindu Americans fit in this divided America? The left wants to critique and reshape their religion, while the right seems more interested in pushing an agenda that ignores their existence altogether. Both sides seem to see Hindu Americans as outsiders, even though they've been an integral part of American society for decades. Ramesh Rao, an academic, succinctly summarizes the frustration many Hindus feel. The messy nature of American politics now, and the increasing divide between the right and the left, make Hindu Americans like me, who have consistently voted Democratic, worry about our political status and our social well-being in this society, and confused about who to vote for next. Rao adds, our colored status, strangely enough, does not seem to offer us the buying power in democratic politics that other privileged colored folks seem to have, despite the monopolist and supremacist faiths they belong to and propagate, with their constant drumbeat about being victims of various phobias. In Republican circles, with their obsession about former President Donald Trump and revanchist dreams about white, European, Western, Christian reemergence as the world's saviors, what Hindus find is temporary, unsafe shelter. As America's political and cultural battle lines grow sharper, Hindu Americans must grapple with a rapidly changing landscape. Once a group that had largely stayed out of the political spotlight, they are now being forced to confront the stark realities of a deeply divided nation. With the left dissecting their faith and the right growing increasingly hostile to their immigration status, Hindu Americans find themselves in an uncomfortable position, torn between two extreme political forces, neither of which seems to have their best interests at heart. To survive and thrive in this environment, Hindu Americans can focus on values-driven engagement, informed participation, and coalition building. Emphasize shared values. Hindus have long prioritized religious freedom, which makes many of them sympathetic to policies that protect religious minorities, regardless of political party affiliation. Issues like the right to worship freely, freedom of expression, and religious tolerance resonate with both the left and right. Engage in policy. Issues like immigration reform, education, environmental sustainability, and international relations, particularly with India, are just a few areas where Hindu Americans may find common ground with different parties. Be informed and critical. Critical thinking and engaged citizenship are crucial, especially when faced with extreme polarization. By doing so, Hindus can reject the notion of political tribalism and instead focus on supporting the policies and candidates who align most closely with their values and priorities rather than being forced into ideological camps. Cut across party lines. Given the diverse and multicultural nature of the Hindu American community, it may be helpful to form alliances with other minority groups and faith communities. By working together with African Americans, Jews, Sikhs, and others who may face similar challenges in American society, Hindu Americans can foster broader political and social coalitions that can advocate for policies benefiting all marginalized communities rather than getting caught in divisiveness. Advocate for representation. Another critical strategy is to advocate for better political representation. Hindu Americans can push for more Hindu representatives and leaders at local, state, and national levels to ensure their concerns are addressed. By increasing their political engagement and running for elected positions, Hindu Americans can ensure that their voice is heard and that their interests are represented without needing to align themselves with one side or the other. Avoid division. In the broader scheme of things, Hindu Americans should be cautious about being co-opted into a divisive culture war where identity politics becomes the focal point. While it's important to advocate for issues that matter to the community, Hindu Americans should try not to let the broader political narrative create divisions within the community. Maintain a global perspective. Hindu Americans also have a unique position due to their connections with India. The geopolitical relationship between the U.S. and India can sometimes influence domestic politics, especially foreign policy. For example, Some Hindu Americans might be concerned with how political parties view India's role in global trade, security, and defense. A global perspective can allow Hindu Americans to engage in foreign policy debates, which might not always fit neatly into different camps but can still be important to their broader community. In game, the coming years will be pivotal in determining where Hindu Americans fit in this polarized society. Will they find common ground with either the left or the right, or will they continue to be caught in the middle? As America lurches toward an uncertain future, one thing is clear. The struggle for political and cultural recognition is only just beginning for Hindu Americans.